Sky-high expectations, bottom-barrel results. Here's why these massive tentpole releases wound up limping out of theaters in 2024.
Question: how do you remake a cult classic for the 21st century? Answer: not like this. Here's everything that went wrong with 2024's The Crow. In mid-March 2024, Lionsgate dropped the first trailer for The Crow. Instantly, the marketing campaign for this remake got off on the wrong foot. The moody trailer confirmed this remake would cover the same storytelling terrain of the original movie and emphasized lots of R-rated violence. Immediately, the press expressed disdain for the project, while the first trailer for The Crow remake secured over 91,000 dislikes a few days after its launch. It was a staggering turn of events that instantly cast a grim aura over the entire production. In the months that followed, Lionsgate struggled to stir anticipation for The Crow. Part of the problem came from the small scale of the studio's promotional campaign. The studio reportedly spent only $15 million on marketing the feature, just slightly over 10% of the promotional budget for Deadpool and Wolverine.
Let's give the people what they came for!
The meager marketing spend meant that even seemingly no-brainer promotional tie-ins for The Crow went unexploited. Most notably, the 2024 edition of the San Diego International Comic-Con featured no Crow panels or photo opportunities. All in all, nothing about Lionsgate's The Crow marketing screamed confidence, meaning audiences found it much easier to give the movie the cold shoulder. When the idea for a Crow remake first emerged, Mark Wahlberg's name was attached as a contender for the lead part. Wahlberg didn't last long in the role, but several other actors would later be eyeballed as a replacement. In fact, the titular role of the Crow became something of a revolving door, through which various leading men walked in and out during the 2010s. Bradley Cooper, Tom Hiddleston, and Jason Momoa, among many others, were connected to the part at some point in time. The 1994 version of The Crow had been meant to launch Brandon Lee as a movie star. In sharp contrast, the initial plan for the remake was to merge the property with a red-hot leading man. In the end, the role went to Bill Skarsgård, who was previously best known for playing Pennywise the Clown in It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2.
Time to float!
While those movies were smash hits, Skarsgård himself would freely admit he's not a box office draw. Supporting Skarsgård was famous musician FKA Twigs and character actor Danny Houston. A few recognizable faces featured in the rest of the cast. Certainly, nobody in The Crow was famous enough to help overcome the movie's shoddy marketing campaign. The very first rumblings of a straightforward Crow remake began in 2008, just 3 years after the last direct-to-video sequel to the original film, The Crow Wicked Prayer, hit the marketplace. At this point in time, The Crow was still relatively fresh in people's minds. It was also an era in which the superhero movie marketplace was still far from peak capacity. That's a radically different pop culture landscape to the one that The Crow finally entered in August 2024, however. By the time the remake opened, it had been over 3 decades since the original Crow premiered, and nearly 2 decades since the last Crow movie. The Iron hadn't just cooled on the Crow brand name, it had gone Arctic cold. That fact appeared to evade Lionsgate's marketing team, however. The abysmal campaign for The Crow leaned too heavily on the pre-existing brand name, with many of the posters and TV spots merely establishing that a new Crow movie was on the horizon. Some franchises can get away with simply leaning on a familiar logo, and perhaps that promotional approach would have been enough back in 2011 or 2012. But a 2024 Crow remake needed to do more to get people's attention, given how much the franchise had fallen out of fashion. There was once a time when R-rated movies stood out in the PG-13 dominated blockbuster marketplace. Just look at summer 2013, when The Conjuring distinguished itself in a sea of PG-13 hits. Summer 2024, however, has been packed to the gills with R-rated tentpoles. Bad Boys, Ride or Die, Alien Romulus, and especially Deadpool and Wolverine have been among the biggest box office hits of the season. This meant that The Crow couldn't promote itself as the one big bloody action movie in a season of sanitized family-friend fare. Instead, to the unconverted, The Crow felt like more of the same. More pressingly, the movie's August 23rd release date placed it in direct competition with summer 2024's biggest R-rated movies. Alien Romulus, for example, opened just 1 week earlier, partially satisfying the public's appetite for graphically violent chaos.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
The real fatal blow, though, was Deadpool and Wolverine, which topped the domestic box office, despite being in its 5th week of release. Honestly, The Crow was always going to struggle to bring in audiences. This became all the more challenging, however, when it debuted into a marketplace in which a more light-hearted and better-reviewed movie also promised a ton of R-rated superhero carnage. The original Crow has become an object of deep personal affection for many 90s kids, and this cult following spans demographics beyond just film and comic book geeks.
I wish the rain would stop just once.
Can't rain all the time.
For instance, the original movie is revered for its influence on the metal and punk music scenes. Meanwhile, folks growing up in the goth sub-community were fond of the film for providing a rare gothic hero in an era of cinema that mostly used their subculture as a punchline. Then, of course, there's a reverence for the film's late star, Brandon Lee, who was accidentally shot and killed during filming. That tragedy has led many modern retrospectives of The Crow to highlight Lee's remarkable work in the title role. Remakes are a dime a dozen in Hollywood, but something felt extra macabre about this one, given the material's permanent intertwining with Lee's personal life. It didn't help that the marketing for the 2024 Crow made the film look sanitized and mainstream, a sharp contrast to the way the original feature resonated deeply with grimy subcultures. This new Crow was supposed to ride brand name familiarity to box office glory. Instead, people's love for the original movie just made it harder to sell a new version of the story. In the days leading up to The Crow's release, a particularly bizarre element of its marketing campaign emerged. Lionsgate didn't allow official reviews to drop for the movie until 4 p.m. Pacific Time on August 22nd. That meant many Thursday preview screenings for The Crow were well underway by the time critics could publish their reviews of the film. It was a strange measure that not only signaled minimal studio confidence in the project, but also meant that there was no opportunity for The Crow to drum up buzz before opening day. To Lionsgate executives, the prospect of The Crow becoming a critical punching bag before release may have sounded like a nightmare. However, it's worth remembering that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Even a deluge of bad reviews 2 days before release could have inspired some social media chatter about The Crow. Perhaps it would have even motivated a few moviegoers to plunk down money for tickets in the name of hate watching. Instead, the conversation surrounding the movie was totally dead leading up to those first public screenings. The only Crow-related discourse that actually came about related to a weird promotional double standard in which influencers were allegedly allowed to talk about the feature before critics. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, several intriguing theatrical movie-going trends have emerged. One especially important trend is that Gen Z moviegoers have become the most important audience for studios to pursue. These avid movie theater attendees have fueled some of the biggest post-2021 box office hits domestically. Basically, if you want a lucrative feature film in 2024, you better appeal to folks under the age of 30. That demo's prominence in modern moviegoing was reflected in the fact that 58% of the opening weekend audience of The Crow landed in the 18 to 34 age range. However, the film's lack of appeal to a broader range of younger audiences clearly limited its box office potential. Bill Skarsgård isn't a beloved heartthrob on TikTok, and FKA Twigs is nowhere near famous enough with college-aged audiences to carry a whole movie. Plus, the Crow brand name is practically unknown to younger moviegoers, and nothing in the marketing campaign made the film appear relevant to young people, like, say, the trailers for Challengers did. Even the use of gothic aesthetics in the posters and trailers felt out of step with the modern punk and emo scenes. Courting the nostalgia of moviegoers, The Crow failed to utilize a demographic that's proven critical for any box office phenomenon since 2021. The biggest domestic movie of the 2020s so far was Spider-Man: No Way Home, which scored a mighty $800 million plus haul in the United States.
Hello, Peter.
But while No Way Home flourished financially, superhero movies in general have had a rocky track record this decade compared to the last. A slew of high-profile, costly bombs have plagued the once untouchable Marvel and DC brands. This included costly 2023 duds, The Marvels and The Flash, both of which failed to match even the domestic opening weekends of prior Marvel and DC titles with their total box office grosses. This was the unpredictable box office landscape into which The Crow soared. When the concept of remaking The Crow was first bandied about, making a superhero movie mostly meant printing your own money, unless you were very unlucky. This reboot, however, entered a marketplace where even new Marvel Studios titles can struggle to match box office expectations. Even with Deadpool and Wolverine killing it financially, the erratic track record of 2020's superhero movies remains, which can't have made things much easier for The Crow. Sometimes word of mouth can save a movie after a poor opening weekend. If audiences really like what they see, positive buzz can spread like wildfire and ensure that a release gains ground after an underwhelming bow. It's a very rare phenomenon, but the likes of Elemental and The Greatest Showman have shown that it can happen. After a dismal opening day box office performance, the producers of The Crow were likely praying that this might happen to them too. Unfortunately, the opening night cinema score for The Crow sealed the movie's fate. Audiences gave the movie a disappointing B- grade. If there's any sliver of an upside for The Crow, it'd be that it didn't receive the worst cinema score for a 2024 superhero movie. That honor belongs to the C+ score slapped on Madame Web back in February. However, a B- cinema score puts The Crow in disastrous company in terms of superhero movie word of mouth, with the infamous bomb Dark Phoenix receiving the same grade in June 2019. April 2022's Morbius, meanwhile, got a similar C+ grade from audiences.
I'm starting to get hungry. You don't want to see me when I'm hungry.
All these earlier titles suffered catastrophic second weekend plummets, with those cinema scores indicating immense audience displeasure that warned off other moviegoers. With such a disastrous response, the word of mouth for The Crow prevented the movie from making a last-minute escape from box office hell. The Crow confirmed a brutal Hollywood truth. If you want to launch a lucrative superhero movie, don't distribute it through Lionsgate. The studio has proven incredibly successful at launching the John Wick, Hunger Games, and Saw franchises, but its box office track record with superhero films is truly awful. The studio has distributed a litany of infamous superhero feature flops, ranging from The Spirit to the 2019 Hellboy boondoggle to 2017's costly Power Rangers bomb. Only April 2010's low-budget hit Kick-Ass proved to be an exception to this rule. Otherwise, Lionsgate's superhero fare seems doomed to fail. Lionsgate's main problem of launching superhero movies is that the studio typically acquires and releases titles based on superheroes who have already had big-screen adventures. Hellboy, Power Rangers, The Crow, these are all characters that had previously famous cinematic incarnations. It's no surprise that Lionsgate's closest thing to a hit superhero movie was Kick-Ass, which adapted a character who had never before been seen on the big screen. Otherwise, trying to wring hits out of familiar brands has never been a recipe for success by Lionsgate, dating back to the days of Punisher Warzone. The Crow would probably have never made bank, even with Disney-level distribution, but Lionsgate's cursed handling of the superhero genre certainly did it no favors.
How did Furiosa, seemingly a surefire hit, end up as roadkill? Were audiences really just uninterested in more of George Miller's desert madness, or are there larger forces at work? Let's face it, Mad Max movies have never really relied on hefty star power. They've been sold more on the strength of its breathtaking action and intricate world building, not to mention their gritty stories. Fury Road was a visual onslaught, a balls-to-the-wall, non-stop thrill ride that captivated even the most skeptical critics who have a hard time with action movies. So why did Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, barely scratch $32 million domestically in its opening weekend? We might blame the marketing. Trailers for the film didn't do enough in our eyes to set itself apart from Fury Road. With none of the same stars but several of the same characters, some fans watching the pre-release hype might not have been sold, especially as the early footage made it seem like the same roller coaster ride as the previous film. But critics and audiences have remarked that it's not nearly as action-packed, being a somewhat slower, more dramatic story than the fast-paced Fury Road. That may have led to some early disappointments, or at least a sense for some fans that it wasn't a must-watch in theaters.
You have it in you to make it epic.
More broadly, though, the excitement surrounding Furiosa also seemed dim by comparison to the last movie. The buzz was through the roof in 2015, especially as a rare R-rated blockbuster, but in the years since, acclaimed adult genre movies have upped their game, with the likes of Deadpool and Joker making it harder for Furiosa to stand out. It's certainly no secret that Hollywood is facing an existential crisis of sorts in 2024, 4 years after the COVID-19 pandemic forced the closure of cinemas across the world. True, ticket sales have rebounded from the first reopenings in 2021, with last year bringing in more than quadruple the amounts collected in 2020. Yet the roughly $9 billion earned across all markets in 2023 was still a steep step below what the industry amassed in 2019 before the pandemic, and 2024 isn't off to a good start. Prior to Furiosa, a Mad Max saga landing like a ton of bricks in late May, The Fall Guy, the Ryan Gosling starring remake of the 80s classic TV series, was a huge dud. The reality is, the movie-going experience may simply never be what it once was. The biggest barrier for Furiosa might be the poor performance of theaters in general. It also doesn't help that the masses saw Dune Part 2 go from its theatrical launch of March 1st to streaming on Max on May 21st, which is less than 12 weeks going from theaters to Warner Bros. Streaming service. A number of would-be Furiosa viewers probably saw how quickly Dune Part 2 hit Max and decided to wait it out to watch the film in the comforts of their own home. Prequel movies have a long history in Hollywood, but the past 25 years have made them polarizing. With the release of the Star Wars prequels, they became an especially touchy subject, especially for fans of science fiction.
Ah, boy. I'm just so tired of all these Star Wars.
A prequel to Mad Max Fury Road may have faced bigger uphill challenges than most, too. For starters, the series is arguably devoid of any serious continuity, at least not the kind that stands up to serious scrutiny. Furiosa even acknowledges this, suggesting that every story in the saga is merely a half-remembered folktale of sorts. Nevertheless, audiences can't be blamed for being less interested in Furiosa's origins, as they were eager to see where Furiosa went next after Fury Road. That film left a tantalizing door open, with Furiosa taking control of the massive citadel once ruled by the tyrannical Immortan Joe. Director and series creator George Miller has promised a more direct follow-up that might very well show us Furiosa in charge of the Citadel, but the focus on her backstory probably wasn't exactly what audiences wanted to see next. Despite the outpouring of love for the character of Furiosa after Furiosa Mad Max saga, the fact that the film was a spin-off with no connection to the title character could be hurting the film's box office tallies. Spoiler alert, Max himself does make a brief appearance, but it's more the Easter egg variety than any kind of actual supporting role.
This is the history of the wasteland, whispered to me by Furiosa herself.
Gripes about a lack of Mad Max in a Mad Max film reached a fever pitch in 2015 when Fury Road hit theaters, as many complained that it was barely about Max at all. Some even complained that the previous movie was already a Furiosa movie in everything but name, upset that the series had put another character into the spotlight. Flash forward to 2024, and instead of a sequel, fans got a spin-off, with Max appearing only as a token cameo. And veering so far from the character of Max for an actual Furiosa spin-off may have been the final straw for many fans. It's certainly accepted by most moviegoers that when a blockbuster film rakes in hundreds of millions of dollars, it's probably going to get a sequel in short order. So when the R-rated Mad Max Fury Road ended its run just shy of $400 million, many probably expected a sequel to follow quickly. Unfortunately, numerous delays, not the least of which were COVID-19 in 2020 and Hollywood work stoppages in 2023, meant it was almost 10 years before a new Mad Max saga hit cinemas. Though some waits can be good for building anticipation, the lengthy time between Fury Road and Furiosa may actually have been too long to maintain such fervent fan enthusiasm. After all, Mad Max isn't exactly Marvel, Star Wars, or the Fast and the Furious, and it's possible that only the franchise's biggest fans were lured back to theaters. Wider audiences who got hooked on Fury Road may simply have lost interest over time. As an origin story for Furiosa, the jump backwards in time forced what is arguably the movie's biggest flaw: the lack of Academy Award winner Charlize Theron. Because it's a prequel and Theron is now almost in her 50s, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, had to ditch the very thing that made the character so memorable in Mad Max Fury Road.
I'm Furiosa!
With a caveat that Theron's successor, Anya Taylor-Joy, does a solid job of replacing the Fury Road star. It was Theron who established the role, and it was she who audiences were clamoring to star in a Furiosa spin-off. Her scene-stealing turn as a character established her as a bona fide action hero, and even those who wanted more of Tom Hardy as Mad Max had to admit she was a dominant force to be reckoned with. Without her, mass audiences and diehard fans alike may not have been interested in a new take on the character Theron made famous. Any other movie that received such glowing reviews would probably be sending scores of fans to the theater. Nevertheless, Furiosa Mad Max saga is leaving many sitting on the couch, and that could have a lot to do with its predecessor, Mad Max Fury Road, and the overwhelming positive reception it received and still holds to this day. Immediately on release, Fury Road was regarded as an instant classic that transcended both science fiction and action genres. It was a cinematic achievement that few had predicted, even with director George Miller's past track record. As a result, Furiosa was always going to be released in the face of lofty expectations that it was unlikely to ever meet, both critically and financially. After all, Fury Road was something of a surprise smash hit as a legacy sequel to a somewhat forgotten franchise that didn't even bring back its main star. Unfortunately, the movie landscape is very different 9 years later, and the odds Miller could match or exceed Fury Road were slim. It might have been wiser to keep expectations a bit more modest. Without Theron and without Max star Tom Hardy, the film loses both of the previous movie's stars, and there's no surefire, bankable Hollywood star to carry the story in their place. Granted, Avengers star Chris Hemsworth plays the movie's villain, the wasteland warlord Dr. Dementus. But the reality is Hemsworth has never really been a huge box office draw outside of the MCU, while Theron's replacement, Anya Taylor-Joy, has only ever had success in smaller, more intimate dramas, and mostly on TV and streaming. Most of her major films had her in supporting roles, such as in Dune Part 2, The Northman, and the much-maligned New Mutants. Her role as a young Furiosa, meanwhile, is the first time she's getting the chance to lead a major, big-budget live-action film. With all the previous factors considered, the studio may have been wiser to keep the budget relatively modest to ensure a big hit. That, unfortunately, was not the case, and the film's cost ballooned to nearly $170 million. While it's not too far off from what was spent on the previous movie, and inflation actually makes the number a bit lower by comparison, it's still a heck of a lot of money. Had the budget been lower, even as high as $125 million, Furiosa may have been seen as more of a hit. When Mad Max Fury Road arrived in 2015, bringing in an impressive $380 million at the worldwide box office, it's easy to think it would have led to a string of sequels. Director George Miller was all too happy to discuss that possibility too, and within a few years he was tossing out tentative plans for spin-offs and sequels that seemed poised to keep the franchise in blockbuster territory for years to come. Thanks to a 9-year wait and a lackluster opening weekend for Furiosa Mad Max saga, however, it's fair to wonder whether those plans will ever come to fruition. Miller has talked about wanting to do a direct sequel to Fury Road, tentatively titled Mad Max The Wasteland, which was said to already be in pre-production when Furiosa was being filmed. Meanwhile, a follow-up to Furiosa, a second prequel that continues the story of her early days, has also been teased by Miller. Even if a direct Fury Road follow-up were to happen with its original cast, though, the studio may be hesitant to return to the well at all. Big numbers on Blu-ray and heavy watch totals on streaming could do a lot to boost the film, but at this point, the future of Mad Max may be staring over a precipice.
With a great budget comes great box office responsibility. After months of ridicule, the Dakota Johnson-starring superhero flick finally graced multiplexes on Valentine's Day. It doesn't seem as if audiences were feeling the love. It's been a long road for the heavily clowned Madame Web, which is set in Sony's Spider-Man universe. When the first look at the picture debuted in November 2023, viewers criticized the film's production value and dialogue, dubbing the film another Morbius-level bomb for Sony Pictures. With a modest by superhero film standards $80 million budget, Madame Web grossed just $6 million on Valentine's Day. It's not necessarily a disastrous start, especially for a C-list Spider-Man character only known to die-hard fans.
Not you again!
I still have something very important for you to do.
But as the weekend continued, it became clear. Madame Web was a big bomb at the box office. As you can see, the numbers were not good. You don't need to have the clairvoyant powers of Cassie Webb to have seen this coming. The writing has been on the wall for quite some time. Madame Web was likely never going to be a breakout bona fide hit like Sony's very own Venom, largely due to the poor reception the film was webbed up in months prior to its release.
I can see the future.
Apparently, so can we, because this movie always seems like a bomb bigger than the one in Oppenheimer.
Oh, she didn't see that coming?
When Madame Web finally debuted, reviews eagerly chewed the film out, labeling it a forgettable mess, making it one of the worst reviewed superhero films in recent memory, alongside Morbius. Safe to say that most think the movie sucks.
You trying to be funny?
Looper critic Alistair Ryder was more forgiving than most other members from the press, labeling it a campy good time. But even if there was humor to be found in the train wreck, Ryder was still unimpressed with the picture, writing, "It's a frustrating case of a film neither living up to its potential as an uncomplicated so bad it's good romp, nor capitalizing on its unique moments to become something that transcends the franchise it's encased in." Audiences who showed up on opening night were equally displeased with Dakota Johnson's latest.
I have growth!
They gave it a C+ cinema score, which might as well be a death sentence for a big-budget superhero blockbuster. Those eager to spend the weekend at the cinemas had far better options in the form of the fan-favorite biopic Bob Marley: One Love, or the enduring romantic comedy Anyone But You. As soon as the first look at Madame Web hit the internet, trolls, jokesters, and even members of the press began to ridicule the picture. Within hours of its release, one line in particular went viral.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
The combination of a line just a smidge too packed with exposition and Johnson's drab delivery turned it into comic gold, becoming the subject of several memes. And while the line didn't end up making it into the finished film, it's just one example of how social media turned Madame Web into a laughingstock months before release. As social media continues to make or break films, general audiences are eager to see what online buzzes before a film's release. If all they're seeing is negativity and trolling, chances are they'll take their dollars elsewhere, no matter how much brand recognition a film has. And for what it's worth, Madame Web does have brand recognition. Sort of. The film's trailer doesn't shy away from emphasizing how it's a story deeply rooted in the Spider-Man mythos. Beyond that, the film boasts two leading talents in the form of Dakota Johnson and Sydney Sweeney. While the former isn't a major box office draw, the latter is a rising star who has proven that she can get butts into theaters. The success of the $170 million Anyone But You proves that. Of course, it doesn't seem she was able to pull it off here. Anyone But You succeeded, but for most audiences, Madame Web was anything but this.
Get up. Get off. Get off. Get up. Me? Go. Get off. You're gonna die if you stay here.
It's one thing for audiences to turn on a movie, but it's another for its lead star to not so subtly point out just how disappointing their latest effort is. As press junkets for Madam Web got underway, Dakota Johnson was pretty brutally honest about the current state of the film industry, strategically throwing jabs at the superhero pick. While chatting with Entertainment Weekly, she discussed how working with the film's use of blue screen was jarring. There's fake explosions going off and someone's going, "Explosion!" and you act like there's an explosion. That to me was absolutely psychotic. I was like, I don't know if this is going to be good at all. I hope that I did an okay job. When it came time to perform her opening monologue on Saturday Night Live, Johnson described the film as,
So it's kind of like if AI generated your boyfriend's perfect movie.
while it's not uncommon for an actor to joke about or even poke fun at one of their films,
After Batman and Robin came out, it was a big bomb, you know.
Was it?
You know, you kind of learn. You learn from your failures, you know, you don't learn from successes.
Johnson's deadpan demeanor sure made it seem like she actively didn't appreciate the experience.
You don't have to know anything about anything at all to watch this movie.
And there's reason to believe that we're not reading too much into that. Variety says that Johnson ditched her agency days after the film's first trailer debuted, a move that the outlet said raised industry eyebrows. And while speaking with Planet Radio, Johnson revealed that she hadn't watched the film and didn't plan to anytime soon.
I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
It's going to jinx it.
No.
I don't want to talk about it.
Did Johnson's comments impact the film's box office? Probably not, but they definitely added to a general vibe that something was wrong in the state of Sony.
Did I die?
From conception to opening weekend, few movies have had a harder time getting made than Megalopolis. Unfortunately, all that time and energy did little good at the box office, and there are many reasons why. Aside from Christopher Nolan, Jordan Peele, and James Cameron, how many directors can guarantee a hit on their name alone these days? Even Steven Spielberg isn't a sure thing after West Side Story and The Fabelmans bombed despite excellent reviews. While even a legend like Martin Scorsese has to rely on streaming services to get his movies made, marketing for Megalopolis centered almost entirely around Francis Ford Coppola, a director once held in the same esteem as Spielberg and Scorsese, who hasn't had nearly the same success in his later career. Coppola made his best films in the 1970s. His run of The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, and Apocalypse Now remains the stuff of legend. His work in the 80s and 90s, however, was more inconsistent. For every solid hit like Bram Stoker's Dracula, there's a disastrous release to match. In fact, Megalopolis isn't the first time he's put up his own money to fund an ambitious utopian tale on the big screen and got burned. The same thing happened with 1981's One from the Heart, which also flopped at the box office. His reputation took a hit and has never really recovered. As such, Coppola isn't frequently on the minds of younger, casual moviegoers, and older moviegoers have good reason to approach his grand return to directing after 13 years away with some degree of skepticism. If Megalopolis was to have any chance of success, it would need to succeed on its own merits, and that hasn't happened.
When does an empire die?
Coppola first conceived of Megalopolis in 1977 as a 4-part operatic experience. He got serious about developing the idea into a movie in 1983 and tried to produce it on and off over the next 4 decades. One would hope such extensive work would allow Coppola to perfect his ideas into a masterpiece. Instead, the final result is a mess packed with too many weird concepts that can't possibly add up. Why does Caesar Catalina freeze time? And what purpose does this power serve him as an architect? Why does he quote all of Hamlet's to be or not to be speech? What's the point of the Russian satellite crashing into New Rome if the aftermath is never addressed? Is Megalon made from Caesar's dead wife, or the power of love, or what? Some of these questions were answered in older versions of the script, with a leaked draft explaining Megalon and Megalopolis more satisfactorily. However, the finished Megalopolis feels like an incoherent grab bag of scenes written at different points in history. If the script itself wasn't messy enough, Coppola had his actors improvise many scenes, which might well have contributed to the jarring tonal differences. Unfortunately, the final product sometimes feels like the characters are in completely different movies. Even with its narrative and tonal problems, one would think a science fiction movie from a visionary director that cost between $120 and $136 million to make would at least be amazing to look at. And yes, Megalopolis does contain some stunning imagery, particularly in the montages where Caesar is tripping on acid and having his shot-up face rebuilt with Megalon. And yet, these moments of grandeur don't appear as often as one would hope. For large chunks of the runtime, Megalopolis alternates between blandly staged dialogue scenes and some of the most amateurish-looking green screen and CG effects to ever appear in a major theatrical release. When an effects-heavy visual wonder like Poor Things can be made for just $35 million, what excuse does Coppola have for Megalopolis looking so cheap? Well, it turns out much of that money never actually made it to screen. Halfway through production, the director fired his entire visual effects team, and members of the art department resigned soon after that. According to multiple sources working on the production, Coppola could never make up his mind about how he wanted the film to look. For all his hatred of Marvel movies, Coppola was responsible for the same scandals that have plagued the Marvel Cinematic Universe: constant last-minute changes resulting in exhausted effects workers and inferior visual effects quality. Coppola had over 4 decades to figure out what his vision should look like, so there's really no excuse for not being able to adequately describe this for his VFX team.
There's still so much to accomplish, but is there time?
Speaking to Rolling Stone, Coppola made a point that the Megalopolis cast was partially made up of canceled actors, and that he didn't want the film to be, quote, deemed some woke Hollywood production. His thinking is somewhat understandable regarding his choice to cast Jon Voight as Hamilton Crassus III, for including a Trump-supporting conservative actor in a film critical of Trump is at least consistent with Caesar's insistence on debating people we disagree with. However, people will surely be scratching their heads as to why Coppola hired Voight's Midnight Cowboy co-star, Dustin Hoffman, as the fixer Nush Berman, given Hoffman was canceled for multiple allegations of sexual harassment. Even more controversial is Shia LaBeouf, who plays the main villain Claudio Pulcher and is set to go on trial for alleged physical and sexual abuse just weeks after the film's opening. Even those who try to separate the art from the artist will have trouble keeping these issues out of their minds when the plot of Megalopolis confronts them by way of Claudio framing Caesar for the statutory rape of underage pop star Vesta Sweetwater. Coppola not only hired actors accused of sexual misconduct, he's also been accused of sexual misconduct on the set of the film himself. The Guardian first reported that Coppola tried to hug and kiss naked female extras while filming a nightclub scene. Then, Variety obtained a video appearing to confirm these reports. While one extra told Deadline that Coppola never made her feel uncomfortable and that the filmmaker was, quote, nothing but professional, another extra claimed that he didn't ask for consent and has sued Coppola for sexual harassment and assault. For his part, Coppola is suing Variety for libel. A statement from Coppola's lawyers published in Deadline calls his accusers jealous and resentful of the fact that Coppola is a, quote, creative genius, proposing that that's why some people spoke out against him. Whether the allegations against the director are true or not, it's likely that these reports made some moviegoers stay away when Megalopolis was released in cineplexes. The only hope a movie as confusing, uncommercial, and controversial as Megalopolis had of making any money rested on critical acclaim. From the time Megalopolis made its world premiere at Cannes, however, it was clear the film was dividing critics. Yes, the film got a 7-minute standing ovation at the prestigious festival, but it seems that acclaim didn't last. Even critics who loved the movie had to lay down qualifiers. For example, IGN's Siddhant Adlakha acknowledged the film as frustrating even while praising its, quote, profoundly personal vision and jaw-dropping transformations, and a mixed review by Looper's own Audrey Fox called it objectively bad but audacious as hell. Of course, other critics were even less reserved in their critiques of the film, with Maureen Lee Lenker of Entertainment Weekly concluding her F-grade review by writing, in addition to Coppola being the mastermind behind 2 of cinema's greatest achievements, he's also now the architect of one of its worst. In short, the underwhelming audience reaction to Megalopolis negated any chance of word-of-mouth success, softening the awful opening weekend box office figures. Megalopolis was clearly hard to market, and Lionsgate's big attempt to promote it led to embarrassment. The trailer tried to get ahead of bad festival reviews by showcasing negative responses Coppola had received in the past for The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, implying Megalopolis is yet another misunderstood masterpiece. And while other films have been marketed with similarly bad reviews, this is surely the first time someone did this with reviews that didn't actually exist. The quotes about Coppola's past work used in the Megalopolis trailer were fake. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker was quoted as saying that The Godfather was, quote, diminished by its artsiness when she actually adored the film, and the Roger Ebert quote supposedly dismissing Bram Stoker's Dracula as a triumph of style over substance actually came from his review of Tim Burton's Batman.
Forgive my ignorance.
Bad reviews do exist for all of Coppola's most celebrated films, but a now-fired marketing strategist reportedly decided to ask ChatGPT for negative quotes about them rather than taking the time to read the reviews. Lionsgate apologized and the trailer got pulled, leaving Megalopolis with even less marketing visibility and more controversy. At this point, if someone is still interested in Megalopolis, they probably want the full crazy experience that audiences at Cannes and the Toronto International Film Festival got. At those festival screenings, a live actor pretending to be a reporter stood up facing the screen and asked a question, to which Caesar responded. This gimmick is already significantly scaled down from Coppola's original vision, in which Amazon Alexa technology would have allowed the audience to ask different questions and Caesar would give the most relevant response. This almost became a reality, but The Verge reports the people working on this concept were laid off in 2022. In most multiplex showings, even the scaled-down interactive theatrical element no longer exists, with Caesar just responding to a voiceover on the soundtrack. Only a few showings at select theaters, labeled The Ultimate Experience, have replicated the live moment that drove critics nuts at film festivals. For reference, Megalopolis averaged $2,157 per theater in its opening weekend. But at New York City's AMC Lincoln Square, which hosted multiple Ultimate Experience screenings, including a preview screening with Coppola in attendance, it made over $84,000.
The first Joker movie blew away critics, scored big at the box office, and stunned DC fans everywhere. The sequel, didn't. So, what went wrong with Joker, Folie? Joaquin Phoenix may be one of the most revered actors of his generation, or any generation for that matter. Phoenix has received 4 Academy Awards nominations and won 1, for Joker no less. As one critic noted for MovieWeb, Joaquin Phoenix isn't an actor defined by his films, but an actor who defines the films he is in. That was certainly the case for Joker, which was about one of the most famous villains in cinema history, but ultimately owes its reputation and its huge box office takings to Phoenix's tour de force performance.
Isn't it beautiful?
Unfortunately, Joker Folie earned just $40 million on opening weekend, less than half of what the first film made. It seems that, despite his accolades and accomplishments, Joaquin Phoenix just isn't much of a box office draw. Sure, he may be a household name, but those households aren't going to see Beau is Afraid or Inherent Vice. Phoenix's global total is $3.6 billion, which seems impressive, until you consider that nearly a third of that comes from the first Joker, a movie that made over $1 billion at the global box office. Before Joker, Phoenix's biggest blockbuster came decades ago with Gladiator and Signs, 2 movies in which he played supporting roles. Yet, even for Phoenix's biggest box office triumph, it wasn't his name that put butts in seats. It was the Joker, one of only a few characters to be an opening weekend box office record holder twice. Of course, Joker Folie didn't need a big star in the title role, because the Clown Prince of Crime is one of the most bankable box office characters in cinema history. Batman opened to a then-record $40 million in 1989, on its way to $411 million worldwide, with Jack Nicholson dancing around in a purple suit and white grease paint. Nearly 20 years later, The Dark Knight broke the opening weekend record with $158 million, ending its run with just over $1 billion worldwide, largely driven by Heath Ledger's Academy Award-winning turn as a character.
Let's put a smile on that face.
Even Jared Leto's much-maligned performance in Suicide Squad helped power that 2016 film to $745 million worldwide, despite a less-than-stellar response from fans. Sure, each of those Joker movies featured another key X-factor, namely this guy. But it's also a fact that the Caped Crusaders' biggest hits tend to feature the Joker. But that's part of the problem. The Joker is overexposed. In the 19 years between Batman and The Dark Knight, he was only in one movie, 1993's Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, a spin-off from Batman the Animated Series. Since The Dark Knight, however, the Joker has been in 5. That's a lot of Joker, and it seems that the failure of Joker Folie has suggested that people might finally be tired of this iconic villain. Madonna was one of the most popular pop stars of her generation, but that star power didn't translate to the silver screen, with a per-film average of just $59 million. Why is this relevant to Joker? Because it's starting to appear that the musician many consider to be Madonna's successor, Lady Gaga, is also destined to bomb at the box office.
Come on, get happy. Better chase all your cares away.
Lady Gaga has sold more than 40 million albums worldwide and became the first female artist to score 3 singles, selling 10 million copies worldwide. She's even more impressive on streaming, with more than 31 million followers and over 100 million monthly listeners, making her one of Spotify's most streamed artists of all time. So do all of Lady Gaga's little monsters show up to see her movies? Not so much. Let's just say it's more of a bad romance. Lady Gaga's films have earned less than $870 million worldwide, with an average of just $110 million per film. Her only certifiable hit was A Star Is Born in 2018, with $431 million. Next is 2021's House of Gucci, with $147 million. But given that movie had a budget of $75 million, the biopic needed a lot more to make bank. Even if Joker Folie tops A Star Is Born, which it probably won't, the movie's reported $200 million budget will likely make this the biggest bomb of Gaga's career. Here's an unhappy truth for you. Nobody asked for Joker Folie à Deux. Sure, the first Joker no doubt made Warner Bros. XX very happy indeed, but it turns out the studio paying for the sequel wanted it more than the moviegoers themselves. Joker was a major risk at the time. It was an R-rated one-off Elseworlds tale that drastically reimagined the Joker and Batman mythos. Not only that, the subject matter was mostly a Trojan horse for what the movie really was, a character study of a lonely and isolated outcast on the fringe of an indifferent society who descends into madness and violence. More than a comic book movie, Joker was a tribute to Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, a fact it didn't even try to disguise with the casting of Robert De Niro in a supporting role. Joker could have failed miserably, and the studio knew it, based on that conservative $55 million budget. Instead, the gamble paid off in box office numbers and awards season gold. Joker worked so well because it was fierce, fresh, and original. It felt like a movie that shouldn't exist, one that somehow snuck past the suits. Joker Folie à Deux, however, feels like a cynical and greedy cash grab. Sure, fans often show up to franchise films that make no effort to disguise the fact that their main objective is to make money, but a wholly unnecessary sequel to Joker feels disingenuous and manipulative in a way moviegoers could sense, which is one of the reasons why they chose to stay at home. Joker became a billion-dollar smash because it crossed the Venn diagram between two very different movie-going audiences, comic book movie fans and prestige picture film buffs. In other words, it was a movie that was just as likely to attract your pretentious film professor as your buddies who show up opening night for every new Marvel movie. Joker Folie à Deux tried to replicate this recipe for success and failed with both audiences. Sure, comic book movies tend to be critic-proof, as demonstrated by the so-so critical reviews for Joker, but the movie was bolstered by strong marks from fans, who loved it even if the critical establishment did not. Joker Folie à Deux is one of the rare occasions in modern movies where both the critics and fans absolutely loathe the movie. In fact, the fans may hate it even more. No doubt it's because Joker Folie à Deux is a confusing, ridiculous mess that moviegoers gave a rare cinema score of D, the lowest ever for a comic book movie. A film can do fine in theaters if critics like it and fans don't. A movie can make millions at the box office if fans like it but critics don't. But if critics and fans hate it, then you're in trouble. Whose idea was it to follow up an Academy Award-winning character study of a psychopathic serial murderer with a musical? Maybe they figured they wanted to make full use of Lady Gaga, but turning Joker Folie à Deux into a musical has to rank as one of the most misguided decisions in modern film history. When the rumors of Joker Folie à Deux being a musical first trickled in, we thought maybe it just featured a few musical numbers, which kind of made sense given it was a journey into the mind of two certifiable lunatics. Now we know for sure that, yes, in fact, Joker Folie à Deux is a full-blown musical. The choice is even more bizarre considering that movie musicals have been out of fashion for film since before most Joker fans were even born. You can spend however long you like debating the reason why many musicals flop, but the simple truth is that moviegoers aren't into them. Sure, there are outliers, but movies like Wonka and Mean Girls hid the fact they were musicals, while other rare hits tend to come from musicals with a built-in audience from Broadway, and even that is no guarantee.
That's what I say to you.
Making Joker Folie à Deux wasn't a creative swing and a miss, but a critical, unforced error that inflicted tremendous damage on its financial prospects. Raise your hand if you had to look up the term folie à deux. For reference, a definition according to Merriam-Webster is the presence of the same or similar delusional ideas in two persons closely associated with one another. In other words, the Joker and Harley Quinn. Sure, you can admire the creativity here, as this title is more engaging than, say, Joker 2, but let's be honest, there's a reason movie studios usually just place numbers at the end of sequels. It works. Most moviegoers are busy, so if you're trying to break out from beyond the perpetually online, it helps to have a title that doesn't confuse people. A studio can take a risk by calling the sequel to Batman Begins The Dark Knight because 99% of moviegoers know that's Batman. But asking moviegoers to know French and psychological terminology to understand the title for Joker Folie à Deux, that's a stretch. The title was just one piece of a larger puzzle too. From the movie's name to its underwhelming reiterative marketing to that absolutely outrageous $200 million budget, everything about Joker Folie à Deux reeked of hubris. In the end, this is a movie that truly took its audience for granted. Alas, said audience just didn't show up as a result, which is why Joker Folie à Deux bombed at the box office. In a franchise full of hits, Transformers 1 only pulling in $25 million in its opening weekend was a clear disappointment. Let's roll out the reasons why it's underperformed. When an Illumination or Pixar feature hits theaters, the expectation is that it's guaranteed to be a financial success. Unfortunately, not every animation studio is so lucky. Case in point, Transformers 1 distributor Paramount Pictures. This studio's homegrown animated movies over the years have had an erratic box office track record that includes a deeply worrying box office bomb. Sure, the company is responsible for lucrative features rooted in familiar IPs. The movie adaptations of famous kids' TV shows SpongeBob SquarePants and Paw Patrol were reliable money makers. Then there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem, which was a late summer 2023 hit critically and a decent performer financially.
This Turtle Mutant Karate Teens? I mean, this is a pretty good story.
But Paramount has also released a bevy of animated flops under its belt. Sherlock Gnomes and Wonder Park were both costly misfires despite launching in prime mid-March release dates. In July 2022, Paws of Fury: The Legend of Hank continued its troubles with animated features at the box office. Part of the problem has been that Paramount doesn't release new animated movies on a super frequent basis, so the studio hasn't developed consistently successful marketing techniques to aid each new release. It's possible for a movie with Mutant Mayhem level buzz to overcome Paramount's animated movie doldrums, but Transformers 1 didn't quite have enough of the touch. Back in 2011, a Transformers installment could easily exceed $350 million domestically, but those days are over. Since the series peaked with Age of Extinction, which made over $1 billion in 2014, there has been a decline. The Last Night from 2017 grossed over $600 million worldwide, yet still lost over $100 million for Paramount. But the studio kept trying, with 3 more movies, including Transformers 1. The 2023 feature Rise of the Beast was particularly worrying, making just under $450 million worldwide. Even with the clear downturn, Paramount's lack of other big franchises led the studio to continue placing all its chips on the butts. A crossover movie between G.I. Joe and Transformers, also potentially starring Chris Hemsworth, is being rushed into production. Yet the terrible opening weekend of Transformers 1 demonstrates that this saga is not an eternal source of revenue. The Autobots have overcome many enemies over the years, but even they are powerless in the face of audience indifference.
We're not spies.
But he is incompetent.
The failure of Pixar's Lightyear in 2022 came down to one worrisome statistic. Families comprised only 22% of its opening weekend audience. Summertime Pixar films need hordes of families to come to theaters to be profitable. If your PG-rated animated feature isn't resonating with families, something's gone horribly wrong. That phenomenon didn't just doom Lightyear, it also unfortunately plagued Transformers 1. Across its preview screenings held 2 days before its proper release, Transformers 1 amassed an audience that was only 28% families. More often than not, people buying Transformers 1 tickets were nostalgic adults. It'd be one thing if Transformers 1 opened to $100 million thanks to largely older viewers, but the already converted Transformers devotees numbers aren't that big. General moviegoers, both young and old, gave the movie a shrug. What's extra worrisome is that younger skewing movies tend to hold much better after opening weekend. Titles like Lightyear, drawing in mostly nostalgic adults on opening weekend, typically drop like a stone after their debut weeks. Sometimes the qualities that make a movie great also doom it at the box office. In this case, not including human characters benefited this Josh Cooley directorial effort tremendously. The more streamlined narrative allowed bots like Optimus Prime and Megatron to come alive as three-dimensional characters. Unfortunately, focusing entirely on animated robots probably alienated many audience members. Previous Transformers movies leaned on the human element to draw audiences in, and put some famous faces in front of the camera to help even more. Transformers 1 technically had famous people in its cast, but they were all off-screen voiceover performers. That's not the same as promising audiences a new Mark Wahlberg action movie that just happens to feature big robots. Ditching the humans was the smartest artistic move that Transformers 1 could have made, and it also likely sealed its box office doom. In June 2024, 3 months before Transformers 1 opened in theaters, Paramount Pictures screened a nearly finished copy of the feature at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival. This massive gathering of animation devotees and artists responded positively. A month later, the production was screened yet again, this time for select members of the press, where it was again greeted with highly positive marks. Eventually, Paramount let Transformers 1 reviews drop 8 days before its domestic debut after relentlessly preview screening the title. All these marketing pushes tried to signal to the public extreme confidence in its latest Transformers title. The confidence was spot on, the marketing tactic not so much. Unfortunately, Paramount kind of forgot the core demographic of Transformers 1, families. Parents aren't exactly swayed by months of pre-release hype when deciding what movie their kids want to watch. The various Despicable Me movies have secured exceedingly worse critical reception, but they're still huge box office successes. In trying to drum up Transformers 1 hype like it was a limited release art house title, Paramount made a serious marketing miscalculation that cost Transformers 1 dearly and further narrowed its appeal. Parents will pay up for any movie their kids beg them to see, and generating film festival buzz means nothing to kids. 2018's Bumblebee opened on a flashback to the final days of Autobots and Decepticons duking it out on Cybertron. This battle was something of a breath of fresh air after years of the ultra-realistic and cluttered style of the Michael Bay Transformers movies. For Bumblebee, director Travis Knight opted to realize these characters as their colorful 1980s G1 counterparts. And for longtime fans, it was a glorious sight to see accurate, vibrant versions of Soundwave and RC on the big screen. This sequence did provide a problem for Transformers 1 though. After all, this reboot also employed G1-style character designs for Optimus Prime and Megatron in a bid to get nostalgic fans to buy tickets to this tentpole. However, that demographic already had their nostalgia itch scratched with Bumblebee years ago, and the novelty of seeing Transformers that look like their 1980s incarnations has worn off a little. However, it's hard to properly exploit nostalgia when a title like Bumblebee has already stolen a lot of the thunder. A sequence like the Cybertron battle that drew extra eyeballs to Bumblebee in 2018 ended up helping capsize Transformers 1 6 years later.
You know what? We are so screwed!
If there's one subgenre families keep rejecting over the last 25 years, it's animated science fiction. A handful of hits exist in this space, like goofy comedy Monsters vs. Aliens or Pixar's quieter romantic drama WALL-E. Otherwise though, this domain is almost exclusively littered with deeply devastating financial misfires. The Iron Giant in 1999 was a crushing blow for Warner Brothers feature animation, while Titan AE was a big factor in the closure of Fox Animation Studios. Even Disney has succumbed to this problem with titles like Treasure Planet. It's hard to pinpoint one reason these projects are so likely to sink. It may just be that the emphasis on intense action may deter families. Historically, audiences prefer seeing kid-friendly animated titles heavy on laughs and musical numbers. And surprisingly, this historical trend came back to haunt Transformers 1. Even with a final trailer emphasizing the film's comedic elements, Transformers 1 looks like the kind of punch-heavy animated sci-fi material family audiences have always given the cold shoulder.
Allow me.
Transformers lore was never simple, but each new movie in the franchise makes everything even harder to follow. This trend peaked with Transformers: The Last Knight, which introduced a secret society known as the Order of the Whipped Wiccans that worked with the Transformers through every era of history. Because of the massive implications of this twist, it's no surprise that subsequent Transformers installments have opted to ignore elements introduced in The Last Knight in favor of more accessible standalone storylines. That approach reached its peak with Transformers 1, which takes things as far away from Earth as physically possible. Foregoing the domain of Sam Witwicky and company in favor of the planet Cybertron helped Transformers 1 from an artistic standpoint, giving the movie a blank creative slate to work with. Unfortunately, this element also likely turned off some moviegoers. The fact that Transformers 1 is a prequel and a reboot meant it couldn't draw in every single die-hard fan of the previous films. Certain audience members nostalgic for the late 2000s blockbuster cinema of their youth may have even turned up their noses at a Transformers movie fully divorced from the explosive stylings of Michael Bay. Even though the original Transformers director is a producer on Transformers 1, the drastic change in style meant that the movie couldn't please everyone.